If you haven't read the article yet, this is going to make little sense. So I hope you read the article. Keith Basso's work is on Apache silence, and silence is a form of language and gives us a chance to understand the importance of silence as communication. Remember, communication has to be the intent of the sender and how it's interpreted by the receiver. Silence is more than the absence of words. It can be extremely expressive, and you have an assignment on this. But the Apache have very strict rules on what can and cannot be silent. And one of the things I hope you picked up on the reading, because you'll need it in the assignment, is how these rules are enforced, how they are learned. Please click and go to the important to understand where the Apache live. And we'll talk more about reservations when we look at the Navajo. But they're basically put in they were put in very arid areas. And areas, in fact, where it's very hard to grow much crops. And they mostly do subsistence farming and herding. And they live in very isolated groups. And this, again, you'll see how this plays an importance in their language. Please click and go to the next slide. The Fort Apache Reservation is very, very isolated. Basso, for this particular period of research, spent 16 months there. And again, we talked earlier when we talked about the Coon about an ideal time is a minimum of 1 year. Their economy is substandard, has about 800 people. They live on welfare, Social Security, and some herding, but they have very few stable jobs. Their kinship is matrilineal, which means that they trace descent down on the mother's side. They have exogenous clans, which means they have to marry outside their mother's group, kinship group. Their medicine is done by medicine men who are in touch with the spirits. As with the Teeb, they practice witchcraft, and you'll have seen in the article already, if somebody kills somebody or does something wrong, it's not their fault. It's because they were possessed by witches. The missionaries came and tried to force a way of life on them. This is the Christian missionaries. And their children, and again, this is very important, until the mid-1970s, were forced to go off the reservation to go to Indian schools as far away as Pennsylvania, where they were not allowed to wear their clothes, practice their culture, or most important of all, learn their language or use their language. Basso looks at several different contexts of how silence is and is not used. And you've read about these and you have some questions about these in your homework assignment. Meeting strangers, courting, and if you pay attention to this, you might have better luck on dates in the future. When the children come home from the Indian schools, when somebody goes off on somebody else, getting cursed out, when people are sad, or at a sing, which is a special ceremony, again, we'll talk about later in this slideshow. As you read in the article, meeting strangers is very different in Apache culture versus our own. When we meet people in New Jersey, of course, we say, "How you doing?" But generally we shake hands or talk. We ask where they're from, what they do. The Apache do not do face-to-face introductions. They watch. The article gives an example of a sheep camp where strangers might go 3 days without talking to each other. They're not compelled to because, let's admit it, talking you lie. They judge a person by interactions and then they might feel compelled to talk. If in fact a stranger starts a conversation, and this is due mainly from their experience with whites, it's because they want something, they're drunk, or they want to teach you something, tell you how to run your life. Raise your hand if you put your foot in your mouth on a first date. or at all, actually, but on a first date um, specifically. Well, I'm sorry, some of you haven't had first dates. But think about it. They have very prescribed rules, including locations for first dates. It might be a ceremony, might be a rodeo, might even be a wake, but they're not really allowed to talk. They could stand next to each other, they could even hold hands, but talking is forbidden, particularly for females, because it might be considered being too forward. Now, this might seem very different than us, but think about the wrong things that you have said or have been said to you in social situations. Might be a nice way to avoid it too. But in any case, it's a different cultural way to handle a situation. We'll discuss this more when we talk about the Navajo. But for over 100 years, Native Americans were taken away from their parents at an early age and forced to go to schools where they might not come home for a year or might not even come home for several years. The purpose of these Indian schools, basically to break the culture, break the habits, take away their language. Now, there's an important scene where the parents watch the child when they come home from Indian school, and they watch them maybe up to 3 days. And what they're watching for is to see if the children have changed. And if the children talk a lot, interrupt, then that's a language of the Anglos, of the whites. If they are silent, that means they haven't been brainwashed, according to the Apache. Please click and go to the next slide. My guess is we've all been there. Cursing somebody out, going off on somebody, or the other side, having somebody go off on you. And our response in our culture is generally to go back at the other person. And that often escalates the situation. So what the Apache have decided is the best way to respond when being cursed out is to back off. Their interpretation as those cursing, those going off, have forgotten who they are. Any involvement will make it worse. And the person must be crazy, lost means of their senses, lost control of their senses, be spelled by a witch, or drunk. And in those cases, there's absolutely no point. They just wait the person out. And the effectiveness to the Apache, and Basso agrees with this, is that you don't have situations escalate. Please click and go to the next slide. Who's been to a funeral recently? Either someone you love or to support someone. Next question. Who has said or been told the wrong thing at a funeral? Wow, he or she looks good. They're dead. Hello. It is for the best. They're in a better place. Does that help? Not really. I mean, I've been there. It doesn't help at all. If you come to my funeral, do not say those things, or I will come out of that grave. Okay? The Apache recognized that grief is an intense but natural reaction, and there's nothing that words could do to take that away. Forcing the grieving to speak requires them to take too much effort. Verbal communication is not needed. They know that at least for the time being, the person has changed. So what they want you to do is stand close, say little, but just let the person know you were there. And again, think about your own experiences at funerals. Think if that's effective. This is an important part of most Native American cultures. And one of the key characters in the Navajo book you're going to read is Jim Chi, who doesn't know he wants to be a singer, sometimes called a shaman, or a cop. And he tries to do both. But what a sing is, it's a formal ceremony. It could be anything to create a blessing, cure a disease, but it's where supernatural powers are summoned by the singer. They enter the body, and the person being sung to needs full concentration. So, therefore, silence is a must. Okay, that sort of gives you the parameters of the article. I really like this article a lot. Now you're ready to do the assignment. So, go do it.